Good evening. My name is Anidjar. I'm a professor in the religion department. I'm also a member of the Institute for Religion, Culture and Public Life. And I'm very happy you all here, very happy we're here on this occasion. I do want to thank Professor Kathy Ewing for her support in organizing this event, as well as Jessica Lillian, who has been very helpful with the logistics. And of course the Institute for Religion, Culture and Public Life, which is sponsoring this event. I will introduce the speakers and then we will get started. Our guest of honor is Dotan Leshem, who's a historian of systems of economic and political thought and a senior lecturer in the School of Political Science at the University of Haifa. Leshem's articles appeared in journals of history of economic thought, history of the humanities, critical studies, political theory, theology, economics, and comparative literature. His article, Oikonomia Redefined, was awarded Best Article of 2014 by the History of Economic Society, and his books, the Origins of Neoliberalism, Modeling the Economy from Jesus to Foucault, is what we are here to celebrate. Daniel Barber is a philosopher who teaches in philosophy and religious studies at Pace University. He is the author of Deleuze and the Naming of God, Post-Secularism and the Future of Immanence, as well as On Diaspora, Christianity, Religion and Secularity. He has been a research fellow at Humboldt University in Berlin, the Institute for Cultural Inquiry, also in Berlin, and has taught at New York University, Marymount Manhattan College, and the City University of New York. He's currently working on Against Conversion, a project that will consist of 2 volumes. His research, which has appeared in various journals, concerns the nexus between religion, race, media, continental philosophy, queer theory, and secularism. Stathis Gourgouris is a professor who writes and teaches on a variety of subjects that ultimately come together around questions of poetics and politics of modernity and democracy. He's a professor in the Department of English and Comparative Literature, the Department of Classics, and at the Institute for Comparative Literature and Society, which he masterfully directed until just a year ago. He's the author of Dream Nation, Enlightenment, Colonization, and the Institution of Modern Greece. Does Literature Think? Literature as Theory for an Anti-Mythical Era. Lessons in Secular Criticism. He's also the editor of Freud and Fundamentalism, and has published numerous articles on ancient Greek philosophy, political theory, modern poetics, film, contemporary music, and psychoanalysis. He's currently completing, a little more than completing, work on 2 other books, projects of secular criticism, The Perils of the One and Nothing Sacred. So Professor Leshem is going to say a few words to introduce, to start up the conversation. Then Professor Barber, then Professor Gourgouris. I will moderate, and if I feel like intervening, I might do so. Please.
Well, I want to first. I'll read my 5 minutes. I was very excited. So I want to join Gil in thanking Kathy Ewing and Jessica Lillian for organizing, from the Institute for Religion, Culture and Public Life, for organizing this event. And Gil, I want to thank you too. I'll try to keep my opening remarks as short and as simple as possible. So what the book is about? I'll try to answer the question in 5 short comments. First, the book describes in details a philological history of the concept of oikonomia. It shows how this word, which played a major role in pre-Christian antiquity, came to play a no less decisive role in Christianity, although having a seemingly totally different meaning. As discussed in the book, the word oikonomia meant in pre-Christian antiquity the management and dispensation of the household. It was used to prescribe how the head of the household ought to take care of life necessities, but are common to humans and animals alike. And then, when looking at the meaning that the word acquired in Christianity, we see that it had a totally different meaning. In Christianity, oikonomia was rendered synonymous for the incarnation of the Son of God in human flesh, so denoting what is common to God and humans. The book follows the history of oikonomia from the private and shadowy interior of the oikos to the divine and public light of the ecclesia. Quite a turn. What the book shows is that although the settings are totally different, one can see many resemblance between the two uses of the word, and that oikonomia was still defined by the same semantic field of excess, prudence, and surplus. As the book argues, in both instances, oikonomia was defined by how people prudently managed excess in order to generate surplus. Second, at the same time, the book tells the history of oikonomia as defining a sphere of human existence in relation to politics and philosophy. Following the changes in oikonomia's meaning, it tells a history of antiquity by narrating how the relationship between what it terms the human trinity of economy, politics, and philosophy were transformed. As described in the book, the migration of oikonomia from the household to the ecclesia was accompanied by a change in the relation between the three. Whereas oikonomia was seen as slaving in the service of politics and philosophy in classical Athens, in Christianity, politics became the handmaid of oikonomia, and philosophy was subsumed. Third, by tracing the history of this human trinity of economy, politics, and philosophy in Christianity, the book also serves as an introduction into the Christian dogma. The book does so by presenting this dogma from a unique perspective based on the crucial role of oikonomia in its formation. Presenting the dogma from the economic perspective offers a new way of understanding the relation between Trinitarian theology, the economy of the incarnation, and the technology of pastorship. Such a presentation, I hope, hypostatically unites and dissolves the tension between Agamben's insistence on the primacy of the Trinity and Foucault's focus on pastoral power. Fourth, tracing the philological, institutional, and dogmatic history of oikonomia enabled me to describe the market economy by the same parameters. That is, describing the market economy by the semantic field of excess, prudence, and surplus, as well as by its relationship with philosophy and politics. This, in turn, allowed two, I believe, novel ways to look at the market economy. The first is analyzing the modeling of the market economy by means of what one may call comparative economics. That is, comparing how these parameters and others are ordered in the market economy by comparing them to their ordering in the classical oikos and in Christ oikonomia. Second, as the story of Christ oikonomia unfolds in the book, we get to learn that many things that are usually considered to be a modern invention are rooted in Christianity of late antiquity. If to name just three, these are economic growth, the subjugation of politics in the service of the economy, and the rise of the social. Exposing the roots of economy and government in early Christianity raises, surely not for the first time, but from a different perspective, a whole set of questions about what really took place with the rise of modernity. The chiefest among these, I think, is what is secularization? Lastly, the book deals with all these historical questions with a clear and explicit intention. And that intention is to offer a critique of neoliberal economy, philosophy, and politics. One that will prove useful for a new political philosophy that will remodel the economy and its relationship with politics and philosophy. Thank you.
Yes, so thanks to Gil and the Center for the invitation. I'll use my minutes here just to kind of home in on one of the things that I found really interesting about the book. And I mean, in a sense, I would say it was really great Christian theology, which is actually kind of what I want to address, like what the stakes are of that, or to what degree your genealogy would entail a kind of antagonism towards Christianity, or maybe better yet, if there's some sort of critique being advanced of neoliberalism, to what degree does that entail a kind of antagonism towards Christianity? In fact, just a few of the things you just mentioned, economic growth, subjugation of the political to the economic, and the rise of the social. You know, these are the things that jumped out to me as someone who has done a bit of work on Christianity. I thought, oh yes, yeah, that's Christianity. So basically, So one of the things I think is super valuable about this book, from my perspective, is that it presents like a really, I think, an accurate account of Christianity as generative of relational possibility. And I think this is very important because I'm speaking a little bit crudely here, but there seems to be a sort of contemporary theoretical common sense in which the problem is limitation, proscription. If we want to talk about domination, domination operates through limitation, foreclosing new possibilities, and so on, and therefore the job of critique is to sort of take aim at that and to engender or generate these new possibilities. Of course, Foucault, and particularly his account of pastoral power, troubles this quite a bit, as you point out. But I think, if you're right, and I think you are absolutely right in this regard, Christianity, while it certainly has been dominative in the ways that are mentioned, Christianity is also like the answer to the problem. To be clear, I don't think it is. But I'm saying, following this logic, I think that's the case. I mean, Christianity is the answer to the problem that it creates. It's like protection money with the mob. So in this sense, my question then would be, not really for you, but just thinking this out, to what degree does one have to oppose all of these seemingly generic goods if one wants to oppose this Christian economy into neoliberalism? So maybe most notably the rise of the social. So I'm posing the question of, should not be so hypothetical. I'm interested in anti-sociality, and I'm wondering whether anti-sociality is entailed by the account that you provide, or whatever people think of this. So, particularly the rise of the social, you have this wonderful phrase, the society of Christian believers in the economy. So what is, just real briefly, I don't want to lecture on what you've done better, but the society of, how can one have this society, which is this sort of constant relational growth? How can one have this society? One can have it sort of uniquely in Christianity, because in Christianity, the divine essence is via the Trinity, or as the Trinity, threefold. So you have the three persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, in this dynamic of perichoresis, perichoretic relation, in which they mutually interpenetrate one another, such that each is sort of reflected or imaged in the other, but that imaging and that relationality does not lose the divine essence. So there's no degree of iconoclasm here. On the contrary, because the Son and the Spirit are affected by and mediate, in a sense, and reflect the Father, it's all God, and all images, in a sense, could be God. And then, of course, you have the hypostatic, Christ becomes human, and then it goes into the human. In other words, far from relationality being inversely related to the divine essence, relationality is sort of intrinsic to this divine essence, which grows out as the Trinity, and sort of overflows and further grows as Christ, and then further grows as essentially ecclesia, church, what you're calling the society of Christian believers. And as what you've argued, I think, really compellingly, is that we should see secularization not as a strict, like, get rid of God and whatever something else takes over, but that this kind of growth has been deterritorialized, in a way, from the object of God, and become, sort of metastasized, as it were. So if this is the case, then my question, just really twofold. The proposal for the constitution of a new political philosophy that comes out in the end, and one that must begin by speaking of the economy, you sort of ventriloquizing Aristotle there. So to me that makes total sense, starting from the economy, because the economy is sort of the ambient condition of possibility of all the other stuff. But I wonder if actually what we need is some kind of deconstitution In other words, if the key word should not be constitution or relationality or even possibility, but rather insisting on impossibility, acceding to destruction, verbs, any verb with like D in front of it or on, you know, you get the vibe, right? This kind of thing. I'm wondering if actually the only way to sort of, whatever your word is, oppose, resist, etc., this sort of economy is actually through this kind of negativity. And not a negativity where one sort of says, this is going to be really negative, but don't worry, like, it'll produce great stuff. Like, no, this is really negative, and it definitely will not produce anything, including relation. I'm wondering about that. And then second, really quickly, I'm just wondering, what role, if any, is there for kind of more traditional critiques of Christianity? I mean, traditions of critique to Christianity. Islam, Gnosticism, Jewish thought, that of course would, right from the get-go, oppose this idea of relationality economy because it amounts to idolatry, or that divinity entails alienness to the world, which you've spoken of actually following Hannah Arendt in Worldlessness.
Okay, so my 2 cents as well. I was fortunate to see this work in its early phases in manuscript form when Dotan was here as a fellow in ICLS, and it was always from the beginning extremely intriguing work, very complex and falling always in many ways between the cracks of languages and disciplines, which was in many ways for him always a trouble that he had to acknowledge in relation to the field. So I duly and truly celebrate the publication of this book, which shows that this great work and research found itself into the public sphere in this way. What I see going on here, it would be, in many ways, it is a kind of what the Germans call Begriffsgeschichte, a kind of history of a concept, except that the assumption usually there is that there is a certain consistency to the concept where then it can be marked through time. And here, it's in some ways the exact opposite, or rather there's a certain consistency in a plurality of faces or persona. I'm using these terms on purpose given the writing and the Christian language. So it's a kind of differential history of economy, of the economy, so that we can say that the concept is never quite the same. So that we can say it is a history of how, instead we can say that it's a history of how a concept comes to be, what it comes to mean, and how it comes to mean it. And what this means that, in that sense, this cannot really be properly philosophical history, but it is, as Dotan said already, a philological one, philological history. That is to say, not so much the history of specific content or meaning, but a semantic history, history of signification that takes a word through its various languages, quotation marks, by this I mean semantic systems. I'll come back to the issue of language per se as such, especially the Greek language, obviously, in a minute. That takes place takes a word through its various languages, and marking the curiosity of retaining a name, economy, while whatever is named by it actually denotes a series of transformations. So that's a kind of a very interesting and difficult, I think, to achieve way of thinking historically. So my biggest concern, that Dotan knows this, is not actually with these books. I really think it's a brilliant book. My concern is a long-standing one, and you know, whichever way he would have written it, it wouldn't have alleviated my concern. My concern is well, I've talked about this before many times. I've written about it. The strange relationship between Christian thought and Greek thought, and to what extent Christian thought can be considered to be Greek thought or not. There is no easy answer to that at all. Obviously, Christian thought is conducted in the Greek language, at least until Latin takes over. But for Dotan's purposes, the work, and the very word economia, and the work that he, theological work that he's addressing in relation to how the concept of economy came to work all the way up to modernity, is a Greek language. And this is a huge question for me, because I don't know to what extent thought can be reduced to language. I know that's kind of heretical, but I say it nonetheless. Obviously, thought needs words to articulate itself. But because there's always translation involved, and translation is not just simply translation between languages, literally speaking, you know, words from other languages or meanings, but there's translation of let's say non-linguistic elements, what I would, let's say, I'd name, just to make it somewhat palpable, I would name psychosocial parameters. That have to do with the primary organization of society. Now, this concerns Dotan a great deal. That's in many ways, economy as a notion is significant in relation to the social organization, the organization of society, not really as simply a philosophical concept. So here there are various things that we can test. A question could be, for example, is the Trinity a Greek idea? Could it really be an idea that would make sense in the Greek language, even though it's written entirely in the Greek language, right? And for Agamben, who Dotan very carefully and diligently criticizes, correctly, I think, there seems to be a seamless. This question is not really asked. He transfers the administrative capacity of the economy from Aristotelian thinking to Trinitarian thinking. He argues for a certain kind of administrative management, the management of the divinity in the Trinity. And it seems to me that actually I agree very much with the way Daniel described what sort of the Trinity does. But let's keep in mind that it was also invented as a concept in many ways by these theologians, Greek-speaking, Greek-educated theologians, the Cappadocian theologians, in order in many ways to, as an imperial logic, in order to, I would say again a little provocatively, immunize, I'm using these words on purpose, immunize the empire from the virus of Greek thinking, including the heterogeneous practice of pagans, of the inordinate masses of pagans still existing in the empire in the 4th century. So the same thing can be said. These tons of words can be used this way, and we can play with them. Ecclesia, an essential concept to Christian thinking, a Greek word that has very important political meaning in the classical world, where in the classical world, in the world, it would mean the gathering of those who are called upon to act politically, but are, by virtue of that, can instantly be recalled, right? Because they're to the space where people come together who share a calling, who are interpolated by a certain, well, by divinity, but by a certain kind of imaginary, by a certain ideology, where they gather together to serve this calling And keep in mind also that ecclesia in the Christian sense also means, oftentimes it's actually translated as oikos του Θεού, oikos του Θεού, the house of God. So, so it comes back in. We can say perhaps the same thing on the other side. This, I've talked about this at length, brings up the issue of secularization. Brilliant work on the account of how Gregory of Nyssa, one of the Cappadocian fathers, Dotan argues that may be the one who perhaps invented, I don't know if that's the word you use actually, but let's say invented the language of growth as an element, as a way of understanding human nature, yes, of also the notion of time and so on and so forth. And on that basis, he argues, there is a certain introduction of a kind of a concept in the sphere of economia that is utterly significant. It is in fact essential to any notion of the economy in both the liberal and neoliberal sphere in the modern economy. But I wonder, and this again is not a criticism, it's just my own concerns about these matters of history, of genealogical history, okay? But can we say that, let's say, there is a seamless connection between growth in the way that Gregory Nyssa imagines it in his, again, imperial sphere, with the notion of expansion as this appears in the era of capitalism, or where capitalism comes to be? I would never say that it's unrelated. I would never go as far as to say there's no relation. But what is the relation, and what are the parameters of relation, the steps, through which we come to see the relation, is always an open question. And this book, goes to great lengths to try to make a very important argument in this regard. Doesn't answer those questions of mine, but I don't think that Dotan should feel responsible for having this task to answer these questions. Basically, the problem always with genealogical continuity, which we all love to do. I mean, and we've learned from, of course, Nietzsche and Foucault, etc. We love to do. It's a way of conducting history that's much richer than any kind of positivist history or progressivist history. But the problem with certain kind of genealogical discontinuity might be that the discontinuities are subsumed in a certain trajectory over time. So I say these things as much as a kind of self-questioning as well. There are little things, but rather that we don't talk about them. The book is really thinks large, and I think it's very important in our time to think large, to think of the long horizon, and not get caught up in details. And for this, I congratulate Dotan.
Please.
Okay. Daniel, I'll try. As to your first point, I tried some of the points you made, Gil and I discussed over time. So I tried to find a solution. If Christianity is the origin, and we do genealogy, and there's a point in the secularization that something goes wrong, try to go back to the Church Father and try to find a solution as well. And as Gil helped me see, I failed. I mean, the article appeared, but no. I said you helped me see. I didn't say you said I failed. But I rushed when I finished the book and tried to find a solution. And as you notice, it took a long time from the book, from when I started the research based on my dissertation until it came out, from many obvious reasons. I wrote it first in Hebrew, and when it had to be translated, and it was much, much bigger, and I had to cut it. So there are remnants of all kind of thinking and attempts, and me growing up a bit. But it was truly enthusiastic about the church father from the 4th century, which I think you can still see in the version today. I don't know. I've read it so many times in so many versions, but and I tried to complete it, and I couldn't do it. So, which is problematic anyhow, because obviously I'm not a Christian, or I'm not a Greek Orthodox Christian, which would try to do that. So that's a question remains to be open. I'm not sure. Also, if I can I say, when we discussed about should I leave it inside the book, Gil said, one is you should leave space for other tradition to intervene. You shouldn't just put the solution in the book, especially, and not just Gil, other people as me see that it's not such a good solution, because I was enthusiastic, I went with it. But yes, there's a place, and I think the more I go since the book can publish, or when I finish writing the book, yes, it should open places for other tradition. Especially from me, I think it's the question of growth, in which the book hardly discusses at all, and the question of the cosmos and the question of the environment. And the question of growth, as I came to see it in the last year or so, being involved in all kinds of environmental discussion back home, is very fundamental. And I think the place for other tradition to come in is against this question of growth, because I think the problem with growth, which we see now more than anything else, is how it's destroying the planet. And so we need to think quite rapidly of somehow to tackle this question, and we don't see a solution in the tradition, either if it's going back to the 4th century CE or 4th century BC. And also, I think, in another way, which also is involved in more, let's say, economics as people talk it nowadays, and I think we have another problem is that growth, we don't have enough growth at the other end, which is hurting our political institutions, political and economic institutions, with what the economists call secular stagnation. Yeah, we don't have growth, which seems to be eroding the basic of the liberal or even neoliberal, but even going back to the liberal formation of the institutions that we have, which I think Foucault and Arendt, which I quote in the book, are totally right. When our society needs growth, or our political institution and political economic institution need growth in order to sustain themselves. So on the one hand, we don't have enough growth, and our political institutions are crumbling. We see, especially with the right populism, but even here, but going all over the place, which is crumbling the political and economic institution. And on the other hand, we see that there's too much growth, even with its very slow growth, and our addiction to growth is destroying the planet. So I think that's a place, in two ways, for different tradition to come. Because, again, looking back, I think that Arendt and Foucault, which I think with them in the book a lot, they try to go back to the pre-Christian times, find a solution, and I don't see I think we need to go behind them somehow. And if it's not in the Christian solution, so it needs to be maybe from other tradition, that would be really good. So, about anti-sociology, I'm not sure what you mean, but I have a lot of problems with sociology, with sociologists, basically.
No, sociality.
Sociality, okay.
Like, in other words...
I thought it's like anti-sociality.
So you talk about the Christian society of believers as a kind of asset produced by Christianity that then is expropriated by the secular.
Against society.
And I'm saying, like, by anti-sociality, I mean, like, maybe it's not an asset.
Okay.
Or, like, maybe destroy the asset or something like this.
Yeah, so that connects to the third point that you raised with the deconceptualization and trying to de everything. which we talked about 2 days ago with George Bataille, I think, who speaks about with the same terms of access and maybe we need to destroy everything in a constructive way. I need to think about it. In 2 ways, I think I have a problem with that. I try to recall why I had so much problem with Bataille, but I left it aside to discuss it. Like when I read it, because 10 years ago. So, by nature, I think I'm a constructivist. So I don't have the impulse for that. It's not a personal impulse for doing that. So it's not. We need another tradition. That's another tradition. So maybe now, 10 years, I've gotten older. So maybe I'm more into these things instead of real things. But at least I didn't connect to it on a personal basis. When you do such a research and you think, I think an ethical political project needs to come somewhere from the inside. That's one thing, and I think there's something maybe in the conclusions that I came up that would go against the whole tradition that I'm trying to put on place, because what I'm basically saying, somehow through history, and Stathis is right, it's not a philosophical history, but a philological history, but we find that somehow the same word, or people saw access, or and they prudently manage it, so they construct. So I know how maybe the tradition that would be really going out of the tradition here again, and then go to other traditions and so on. So yes, but that would need to come from you maybe. Well, I'm not sure how helpful I am for that.
Yeah, it's just kind of thinking about the context of how you see your claim.
Yeah, so the claim is constructivist and in the tradition, but if I keep on failing, maybe I need to try and join other forces. So I think these are the 3 basic major points. And thank you very much. I think you presented very, very accurate and nice. So about that's not being a history, I think I discussed it. It's a semantic history, and I think I try to let in a sense, this is coming from phenomenology, as letting the thing speak for themselves, and not coming with a disposition that forces myself on them. And I think it was also, from another perspective, the way the work was done, and the intellectual atmosphere that I was working in. I think Israel is probably 10 years behind the States, but maybe it was still the same as here. But when I said, well, there's things that keep on staying throughout history, but you cannot say them. Yeah, I mean, they said it twice. Once as being friendly to me, you won't find work, nobody will talk to you. And in the other sense, you cannot say it because we don't think this way. But I think that even though it's a philological, it comes to the same conclusion as a philosophical, or very near to what a philosophical history would come, in a sense. Because, again, we have this 3 concept of the semantic field, and it's pretty much the same with all these minor but very big differences between the 3. So, in a sense, it plays with all this kind of history that you said, that I'm trying to not to fall into each one. But that's the way I worked. And again, when I tried to write the failed attempt, I think I need to learn how to write as a philosopher. It's a different kind.
Not necessarily.
So it's a different kind of writing where
Unlearn how to write.
maybe. But it's a different kind of writing. Maybe I'm not a philosopher per se, and I need to stick to other kinds. I think this was enough. It's 10 years. I need to start writing a different set just to keep me not so bored with my work. But maybe the philosophical style of writing is just not for me, as he thinks is not for me. You raised a question. One is a general question, which I think we can discuss. I'm not sure if I have a clear view about thought and language and how we translate. In that sense, so I'll again stick to the particular. I think that from my research and from what I read, I think the Church Fathers are Greek philosophers. You can see how they're working with the concepts. I mean, there's a big, of course, debate about this, and of course we have Harnack and all the Protestants basically saying that that's their fault, but they Hellenized the Christian, which is more Jewish. And another, I had just someone say that I'm faulting like Agamben, not in the sense that he Latinized, I would say, but ignoring the Jewish tradition that comes into Christianity, and I say that's totally a Greek tradition. But because I found the word oikonomia, I found even though people in the US we don't speak, but when I speak to people in Europe, I say as a Jew, how can you not follow the Jewish tradition? But I followed the Greek oikonomia, and I think that you can see continuance. And I think also that their brilliance is that they solve many problems that the inhabitants or the elites, the elite of the empire was dealing with. And I think they brilliantly solved these problems, and that's why they won the debates. So you say they immunized the empire, so I would say it more positively, but yes, I think that's why they did as Greek, and speaking to the Greek, to the sense, of course, in the empire, when you were thinking in Greek, because that was the language of thought in the empire. And I think they won the debate because they supplied the best answers, really good answers, to the problem that people were dealing with them, and the level of the elite. Not because usually when people speak about Christianity, said, well, they gave the hoi polloi, they gave the multitude answer with the next word, and everything was. But you see these people, they went to the best schools and they were elite of the elite. So I think that's in the elite question, in the philosophical debate, in the cultural debate, whatever you want to call it. That's how they won. About the continuance to modernity on the other side, I do a lot of hand waving to avoid this question, and partly because I'm not schooled in the languages and the history of early modernity, late Middle Ages, High Middle Ages, but I think now we have more and more work. I hope mine will make people who can do this book much better than I do, if I had to do it because of her schooling. But we see, without any connection, some work that's being done on it, so the gaps are closing. So maybe we'll have an answer to that. So if you go in a historical area, there's a gap, and I can only try to persuade because it's really similar. And I said, oh, look, Agamben did it and Foucault did it, so so go and argue with them, not with me. But yes, there's something missing there. I think these are the major points that you made.
Thank you. I do want for the audience to actually have opportunities to ask questions. So all I want to do is really kind of maybe underscore some of the things that were said. I mean, in relation to continuity and to genealogy, I continue to be amazed that even though we have entire disciplines who are, of course, history relating, who are building themselves on not only ignorance but the irrelevance of history, within the humanities and the qualitative social science, the only words that we have for someone who does not historicize is essentialize. And it would be good if we actually had some kind of an imagination, which I think is available, and some of the work that you do points us precisely in that direction, that not to historicize is not necessarily to essentialize. So what you say, Stathis, about continuity is well taken, but I think that we have to be able to think of history, as it were, in a way that is not just, well, this is what was, this is what is, and how do we make the connection? I mean, one thing for the historical that has to be said is that the great gap, which is the knowledge that we have of the economy between antiquity and the late Middle Ages, is part of the work, the historical work that is being done here, the kind of knowledge that becomes available precisely by looking into sources that were not necessarily obvious. But to put it another way, in relation to language and to that which is taught, I agree with you that we don't actually want to completely collapse language and thought, but one of the problems is whether we can actually unthink the language that we use. And I'm saying this because it was at times, reading you and rereading you, it was at times difficult to know why some of the words that we're using were there. Was there a kind of irony, a kind of distance or necessity of reinscription? I'm thinking of the way you begin, the human trinity. It's such an amazing phrase, and it's a phrase that corresponds to those three realms, the two spheres of existence that you indicate, economy, politics, and philosophy. And one of the things that kept nagging me was, why do we have to divide being or even human activity into those three spheres explicitly? I mean, one question would be, where does ethics fit into that? Does it actually include all of them? Does it move to the side? I mean, the way in which you handle the law is also part of that issue. The law gets collapsed into politics, but then the question is, what was it before? What was it after? But the fact that you, when you refer to Foucault and to theory, art, ethics, you call that a triangle. But when you speak about economics, politics, and philosophy, you call that a trinity. It's interesting. You speak, of course, of the economy of the incarnation, but you also speak of the incarnations of the economy. Was that absolutely necessary? And then you talk about the baptism of concept, right? Gregory, for example, baptized concept. Did he have to? Did he really do it? Should we think of, in fact, the particular conceptual gesture that consists in baptizing a concept? But I think that the term, and it only hit me when I was reading your piece on the martyr, which I think is very important, although I do want to say that the reason why it hit me is our friend, Mark Nishanian, has been working on Bataille, as it were, and on Hannah Arendt and her reading of the three persons that you talk about. And he reads her completely differently, because what you describe as the martyr, as in fact the embodiment and the survival of the moral persona, he reads her as in fact saying, no, what happens in extreme situations is precisely that the moral persona is what is destroyed. The possibility of the witness, right? It's the death of the witness, as many have repeated. But what was interesting about this is that the word person, which has such a loaded history, which is very much part of this, which Arendt traces and which you trace as well, is a term that continues to insist, and you use it throughout. In other words, it's difficult to even imagine, which is where history is no longer relevant, right? It's the fact that a particular concept is completely granted. I mean, who would say today, I'm not a person? I mean, it's so completely crazy.
Well, there was a time where people
of course
didn't say that.
No, I understand. But the possibility of referring to a human being as not a person, as a non-person, would be very much a problem. So much so that we have an entire Christian discourse that is actually bent on describing a fetus as a person, namely as a legal person. So that we have Christianity, which is actually trying to close the distance between the flesh and the law. An amazing development for any kind of Christian thinking. But what's amazing is that in your argument, the person, and I'm thinking here of the way in which language is thinking, language is thinking us, rather than some kind of identity, in fact, between language and thought, but our own inability to think beyond a certain language and a language that is overdetermined. So that's my general question. Is there a way of, just thinking, for example, of something which would be slightly anachronistic between psychology, politics, and ontology? Would that be a different kind of trinity on the basis of which we would think? And given that you have mentioned our concern with growth and its impact on the environment, right now we call it the environment, even though we're talking about the planet as a whole. Would actually thinking with different categories of different divisions of being, as it were, would that actually help us to get out? It's almost I almost felt like saying like your genealogy is a humanism, and it's at times a little disturbing. And since you brought up Bataille, I'll bring it as well. That the question of destruction, if I understand Bataille's argument, which may also be a way of linking what Daniel was saying to what you were saying. I appreciate that you say, well, I'm a constructivist, and Daniel is asking you to be a deconstructivist or a destructivist. Yeah, destructivist is better. But Bataille's lesson is that precisely construction is not at all a creative destruction, but is in fact a destruction through and through. And that if we actually don't manage to destroy excess, then excess will destroy us. So that when you advocate a kind of ontology of abundance, I'm wondering a little whether you're not denying the part where destruction is part of the deal, no matter how we look at it. And certainly by now, one might argue that it's anachronistic, but by now we cannot deny the destructive dimension of everything that has gone under the name of creation and production and growth and fertility and whatever. We are in the midst of destruction, and so I'm not sure whether you actually want to insist that the two positions are so distant. Wouldn't part of your thinking have to actually put destruction rather than the positivity of abundance and excess into the frame?
Okay.
That was just an introduction to it.
About the uses of words, I think that some of it is not that well thought. Some of it has to do with the long time it took me to write, with the translation and my English not always being because I had to Greek and Hebrew have very many differences, but were at least ancient Greek were not language with so many words as English. So and when you think of and then I had to translate let's say even excess and abundance, yeah, because when I thought in Hebrew it's even the odefot food, so the excess and surplus are the same, nearly the same word, so it plays really nicely in that sense. So sometimes it's just a problem of translation, even the limitation of me as a writer when I try to write the same thing over and over again. So sometimes it just some of the things I cannot excuse, but just my limitation as a writer. But that's not a good excuse for and even with the Trinity, I wasn't aware of the of how important. Of course, I was aware it has to do with Christianity and Trinity, but because when I think of Hebrew with the Shilush, which I started in translating, Shilush is not only the Christian. It's not only the Trinity of the Divine Trinity. Yeah, we have Shilush of everything. So that's part of the. I think sometimes there's much more than I meant. Second thing I think is irony is very much in there, because as the writers keep on rewriting, translating himself to first from Hebrew to to English, and then turning a manuscript with 500 words, which is written in English, which is on the syntax is in Hebrew, and then rewriting as I've been here, and my English is getting better. So if you don't have the irony, you just you're all alone. You die. So you need to keep on having some jokes that only you understand sometimes in order to keep the material alive. So there's a lot of irony, that's most of it is a survival mechanism, and I hope some of the readers would get, I hope everyone would get all the irony, but there's a lot of irony in play. Some of the language is also, and I think that goes to more essential things that you mentioned. I mean, these were essential, but I had excuse to make it not so essential. But I think is that I began working on this project as a totally Arendtian, and the humanism and the human trinity of politics, philosophy, and economics. Of economy is very much Arendtian, and maybe we can say ancient Greek in the sense that if you read ancient Greek with Arendt, I don't want to say that it's, but it is very ancient in classical Greece or political classical Greece. But when you read Arendt, it's when you first meet that material through the eyes of Arendt, it's totally different. She did, of course, she has a history of she tells the history of communal life from the political side. Yeah, and she mentions the economy all the time. Yeah, the rise of socialism, the flip side, that economy and politics turn on the other side. And she started writing the book about form. Yeah, so we have the Trinity, and when you read Arendt, it's very that Trinity. And you have the law, which I cut out because it's too complicated, bringing the law and how it plays. But you have the law as well. And if I small intermission about the law, I think, and it connects to what you said about the persona. I think that the way he discusses the law is already Latin, I think, in a sense. And even the persona as a legal term in the book, and in Christianity, persona is really not a legal term. And if we go with the persona in ancient Greek, it comes from the theater. So it's not a legal term. It become legalized, I think, by the Latins, or by Latinizers anyhow. I don't know where in history, because that was a black hole in history that I have with the Latin and early vernacular Euro. So I think that's why I have this specific trinity. That's an Arendtian tradition or Arendtian reminiscences that I need to free myself in order to answer your question, because other concepts came, not just ethics, which I can fit somehow, because ethics has to do with economy from the beginning. In classical Greece, ethic would be, because the oikos is a non-legal sphere, it's an ethical sphere for the oikodespotos, the head of the household. If he doesn't kill all the slave or just abuse them, yeah, it's all an ethical question in two senses. One, that we modern would speak about ethical question. I mean, to be fair to be okay, whatever, to be just to others. Yeah, but slaves are very really others. Yeah, and also the positioning of myself, the ethos, the position that I find between me and myself, which is more of the Greek sense, and I think the two are connected somehow. So maybe the ethic can be played, and we see how it moves from one sphere to another. But with the other stuff, yeah, but I think history of 3 terms, such long history, is good enough to begin with. And it is, yeah, as I am a constructive, or at least was a constructivist, I mean, let's say this book, or let's say, is also humanistic, very much. So if one need to do post-humanistic or non-humanistic or a-humanistic and deconstructivist or so I think I hope that the book gives the material, and it's in a sense not so much you can take it and play with it as you wish. I think it's centered empirically you can work with it. So I was trying to make it as much possible, even though it's really a Arendtian and Foucauldian, and with my also very much influenced by my economics education and my working as an economist. So I always think about how it relates to economics today all the time. So many of the terms have to do with how economists think today, because that's a lot of the irony, which unfortunately nearly only I see, because economists today won't go and read that and understand the irony, but a lot of it is irony about how economists think today and the concept they think today. But I hope it stands there, that anyone can use it and take it. It doesn't force my opinion for people to, so you can be deconstructive or destructualism. And as to what he said about Dotan and all that, as I told you, I need to think of it. I think that's a good time when the book is over or behind me, and I try to do some stuff, and we see destruction. I mean, in the last couple of years, I mean, even if you're when I wrote it, not even when I wrote it, but when I finished writing the dissertation that it's based on and started working, it was very much influenced by Occupy all over. So it was an optimistic and constructivist, in a sense, period. Okay, because everyone says when we had the event, we thought, everybody's ready for a new construction. We just don't have the answers how to yet a new governmentality. That was the evening we organized together. About occupying the new governmentality. So we just need to invent governmentality. I think today we're very much more pessimistic.
Not me.
Not okay, but so I hope I can relate to the constructivists. I think that's what we need. But I think the years that came after and the way things are going, it's hard to even if you are a constructivist, it's hard to ignore the amount of destruction that's going on, and seems to be going more and more every day as we speak.
Can I say something?
Sure.
I just need to make clear that I wasn't suggesting historicizing in the least. In many ways, my argument would be for a kind of problem of when we go. The problem with genealogical work is, in fact, historicizing. We are engaged in historicizing. Dehistoricizing would be something that I'm very interested in, which would be something that would presume that certain things cannot be transferred. That actually is dehistoricizing. It's not historicizing. So let's say a concept, let's say a word and a concept is used in the same language. In different notions of time. What does it mean for a concept to be used in a circular notion of time, for it to be from it being used in a linear time, or in a scatological time, an allegorical time? So that is not something that has to do with language. This is where, I mean, the language is the same. I mean, it's the same to the degree that we can tell, but it's not the same, because the imaginary conception of time does all kinds of things to language. So that's sort of what I was trying to get at. So in the sense, you can say, like did Dotan, the Cappadocian fathers are Greek philosophers. Of course they are. They're Greek philosophers. They're trained in, they are literally trained. They're trained the best, they're trained in the School of Athens, actually. So they know everything. They know exactly what they're doing. They're manipulating concepts and so on. Playing amazing games with language, extraordinary things. But does that make them Greek philosophers insofar as they are doing what they're doing? This is a question that I don't think it's so easy to answer, and that's not a historicizing. I don't want this to be understood as a historicizing project. On the contrary, I want it to be thought as dehistoricizing.
Venture into terrain that's a rather different disciplinary orientation, and sort of maybe taking off from the question of language and thought, being somebody who thinks also about how people do things, what is the relationship between language and thought and action, much of which we don't even think about, much less articulate in language. Which then brings me to thinking about, and not having read the book, I'm at a slight disadvantage, but just thinking about, talking about this word that you're tracing, this something. How coherent or is the tradition that you're tracing genealogically? In other words, are you pulling out a single strand, and are there different kind of strategies and tactics that speakers or actors are using to embody and instantiate these uses of this category or concept?
Well, as long as we're the ancient Greek word, so I begin with, I'm not a philologist by plugin, so maybe philologists would say that I'm not doing a really good, but I'm doing a philological history per se, so I'm following, and I'm using, people did before me, so I have, especially should be mentioned, John Reumann, who did it in the 50s, and traced the uses of the word oikonomia, how it goes in place. So I really follow how people use it in speech. So but I left out the explanation because I need to keep it short, but what we see is that oikonomia was used to begin with as oikos management, as household management, or estate basically, because it was really like our households. It's well-to-do Athenian citizens, the literature was written for them, so they had estates. But then nearly from the beginning, but mostly as we move from classical Athens to the imperial age of Hellenistic and Roman Empire, we see that the word economia is used almost everywhere. I think much like today, when we economy of this, economy of that, and that's not like the economy. And we see that the word it's used in the oikos, of course, so the original meaning is keep being used, and then it's used in the economy of the body, so it's the organization of the body, and also ethical economy, where economy is basically lying, because you're prudently using stuff, or let's say when a doctor speaks to his patient and he doesn't tell him the whole truth, sometimes even a bit lying to him, he's using economy, because you have a certain end which you want to get to, and you're allowed to lie. And then you see it in the cosmos, so nature is economized by divinity, or nature itself, depends on the school, and you have it in all the sciences, arts and sciences. Its most frequent use is in literary criticism. They say Homer is the greatest economist of all because he economizes the uses of word in his poetry. So a word, let's say a gun that would appear in the first act, which won't be guns in the first act, but wouldn't shoot in the third act. So Homer is the greatest economist of antiquity according to this strand of word. And you find it everywhere, and usually it's being prudent in the uses of the resources of the field. So that's a loan word all over antiquity. And when it's used in Christianity, it begins. It's not a very common word in the New Testament. The word economia appears only 9 or 10 times, and most of them are in the classical uses of economy as household management. Paul uses it in a different meaning, as a loan word or as management, as a company. It's a management of the mysteries. So when you think of it, it makes sense because he's writing for Gentle, for Greek-speaking audiences, he writes his letters, and he uses words that they know in order to persuade them. So he uses economy, and if you read it in translation, it wouldn't be translated as economy. It would be a dispensation, usually. So he uses and he takes on the semantic field, but economy is management. And also we know that they had in the temples, you had an economos, someone who managed. So it was a word that everybody understood and as management. So you have economy of the mysteries, of the economy that he uses. And then the word is not that much used until the end of the 2nd century, when you have Irenaeus of Lyon, who, although from Lyon, is a Greek-speaking person. He came from Antiochia, which is basically Syria today, and he uses it because there was another school, which now we say is not Christian, but at that time they thought of themselves as Christian, the Valentinians, who used the word oikonomia very much. It was a very important term in their terminology of divinity, which is very complicated. I won't get into it. And Irenaeus is using it. That's a strategy they used a lot as rhetorician, and he was a really good rhetorician. He takes a concept that his opponent used, and sorry for using the word, baptize it, or because he's in charge of making orthodoxy, so he orthodoxized the word. And economy become a really major concept in Christianity with Irenaeus. And you have the economy as a concept of history. So there was a divine plan of salvation. In Irenaeus, you find that meaning, and it's something that materializes in the word. So instead of speaking about the economy of the mysteries, you have the mysteries of the economy. And as time goes by, the word economy, if it wants a economy of something, it will be the incarnation. So it will be synonymous to the incarnation. So I do trace, based on people who did it before me, I think I find something that you find, but basically I use his historian who did it, how the word moved from the ancient oikos to the Christian ecclesia. So that's the first level, or let's say the first chapter starts with a philological history of the first 200 words of use of the how Christians use it, and I have an article which traces the uses between oikos and ecclesia in the imperial word, which traces all the meanings that it had in between. So it's founded in philological history in that sense.
So could you call it like a politics of language then?
In what sense? That's really problematic for me when I speak about economy and politics. Maybe it's an economy of language. So,
yeah, like I said, just in the sense of kind of struggles over how it's being used. That's what we call politics or
something. Yes.
You're tracing change, so
yeah, I'm tracing change. I don't find too much struggle about how to use the word. So it's used very loosely, and everybody can use it. I think that what makes it, you have, that's a theological struggle between Irenaeus and the Valentinians about the use of the words, but the word is used in the politics, or let's say in the theological debate. So it's not so much what the word means as much as they use a word in order to get their point made, because everybody knows basically what it is. And then in the 4th century, when you have orthodoxy with the Common Council, so yes, again. So there are points here. But even, I don't see too much debate, because even in the 4th century you have, which is a big debate between me and Agamben, because he did respond. So, but my main criticism of Agamben is that in the 4th century you have a distinction between theology and economy. But somehow everybody agrees. So you have the Orthodox and the Arians all use economy in that sense. So something happened in the beginning of the 4th century. You have an explanation which I think economy couldn't. It was too much for economy, the word, to hold both the Trinity and the Incarnation. So they had to have two words. So theology went for the Trinity and economy for the Incarnation. But everybody uses it. So they have many debates. Is Christ equal to the Father, or is he half human? All the debates, but it's not the debate about about how to use economy, but what economy means in the sense of how Christ. So there's not a lot of debate about the word economy itself. About it.
Non-self-conscious.
Yeah. Yes.
Hi. I didn't read the book. I got an email with the title and I said, I should see this talk because I used to study political economy here many years ago. I write on neoliberalism and its effects on education. And I'm interested in a book that has all the, someone mentioned it's a series of transformations. The way that the word economy and the economy are used are a series of transformations. And I'd be interested in reading something about, or their transnational notions of household economy and how they've changed in neoliberal time. And I read the title and I said, Origins of Neoliberalism from Jesus to Foucault. And I said to someone, your way is stop to Jesus. And you didn't, you went back farther than that. But I do have a question as to why neoliberalism is in the title. Liberalism, I get. There are certain touchstones you can look at. You go back 150 years ago when people didn't study economics. They studied the other two ends, those two ends of the trinity that we were talking about before. John Stuart Mill wrote 18 editions of Principles of Political Economy, and then you had the marginal revolutionist and mathematical economics comes in, and you have this idea of the individual that's sort of embedded in there. So that's one touchstone, and the idea that you're getting away from an economy that's embedded in social and power relationships and trying to sort of spin it out from there. But I don't quite understand lineage. Another touchstone I would look at. Let me just look at here. If you look at the, and I see modern liberal economics as coterminous with commercial development, and at the same time the schism between that resulted in the Protestant Reformation. Not so much Lutheranism, but more extreme forms that actually did get rid of the Trinity. When I used to also look at the English literature, and John Milton rejected the Holy Spirit and such, and that sort of sets up the conditions for it. But neoliberalism I associate with something that's maybe 70 years old, that started because we invented transistors, and that changed the relative costs of moving labor versus and the financial instruments have gotten increasingly more complex, and you seem to have that we have a unified economic system but a segmented political system. So I'm trying to figure out how this directs to neoliberalism as opposed to liberalism. And the second question is, if I'm looking at economic liberalism, from my perspective, it's rooted in the commercial transformation in the 1400s and 1500s in Europe, and the growth of cities, and that led to new ways to interpret Christianity that were conducive to capital accumulation, etc. That's not a hardly new argument of any sort, but why neoliberalism as opposed to just liberalism? Because I don't see neoliberalism as really being rooted in the 3rd century. That's my difficulty. I may be very interested in the transformations you're talking about, but why is neoliberalism the title?
Yeah. Well, the frank answer, the book had a different title.
I was wondering about that too.
And I see that the new title brings a lot of people.
What was the old title?
It was the Human Trinity from the Economic Perspective. But because of neoliberalism, it wasn't commercial enough, and we had to change it, or let's say from a better point of view, it didn't capture the people thought, and I'm not that good with titles, but it misses something essential that the book has. So that would be on the level of the excuse of my translation from Hebrew to English. But I think when thinking about neoliberalism, which is not so much in the book, it's only in the last 20 odd pages, but That's a lot of work I do for the last 4 years or so, which I hope to publish very soon. And neoliberalism is that neoliberalism is a system of thought. I think we know now. People treat neoliberalism in all different ways. But if reading Foucault, and that's very much influenced by Foucault, but his lectures in 78 and 79, neoliberalism is a strand of thought that began in 1937 when people from the US, Chicago School came, and people from France. We have the Austrians, we all know what are associated. The Germans were all the liberals, people from England, from the LSE, and Switzerland. They met in France in 1937 in the what is called the Walter Lippmann Colloquium, and started thinking how to save liberalism on the one hand from communism or the rising of Nazism, but from, let's say, from totalitarianism, even the word came later, on the one hand, and also against Keynes, which they saw as their common enemy. And they tried to reinvent liberalism. So you say about the liberalism of the 19th century. They said there are certain problems with the 19th century liberalism, and we're going to solve them. And of course came the war, and they were all spread out. And they met in the 1950 in the Mont Pelerin, which became the Mont Pelerin Society, and it was a think tank that worked until they, in Germany already in the 1950s, they were in charge, or they were making what is known as the economic miracle. Yeah, it's not so much as the story they tell, and a lot of the German thing, and now is related also to what's happening in Europe today. So the notion of German neoliberalism is becoming really important, because what's going on in Europe is they were in charge for saving for the economic miracle of Germany. And Foucault writes a lot about it, and you have other people, when they speak about neoliberalism, they think about this kind of thought. And I'm one of these, as historian of economic thought, I join them. And when we see with neoliberalism, as I said, they try to save liberalism, so they make few changes in liberalism, which are very important, I think, in the story. If we try to criticize today, we don't live in a liberal world, but we live in a neoliberal world. And if we want, the book is try to criticize neoliberalism. So I think, yes, the title is important for the origin of neoliberalism, because we live in neoliberal economy, politics, and what happened to philosophy is a different thing, but economy, political economy, so we need to criticize it. So we need to think about neoliberalism, which developed from liberalism. But also, in a sense, neoliberalism is a critique of liberalism. But that's maybe, if we try to think of a way of bringing a critique, in constructive critique, even if it's this total destruction, I think that the neoliberal example is a very important, good example, because they criticize liberalism and embedded liberalism of Keynesianism perfectly. It's very impressive. It's a very impressive philosophical work, but not just philosophical, also governmental. Because when they had a chance in the 70s, they took over. So maybe that should be a source of inspiration for us in many ways of how to do that. And it's easier now, because in the 50s, to meet in Mont Pelerin, for Milton Friedman, it was the first time he got out of the US. But it's not so hard to travel across the world and meet as it is today. So I think
you just have to know to invite.
Yeah, you need your George Soros, I guess, in order to have the money to get everybody at the same time.
Can I quickly interject? I mean, in terms of a connection between whatever 3rd century and neoliberalism, I mean, of course, it's like a super malleable term, but one of the characteristics that I often see associated with neoliberalism is sort of, I don't know what you want to call it, a kind of pointlessness to it, right? Like, it's not really, it doesn't really respect any other end other than its own growth, right? And it doesn't really know why it's growing necessarily. It does this, right? Disregard. So you see people argue over whether it can be brought to heel under traditional sort of welfare state orders, but people say, well, it doesn't really work because, we're beyond that. for better or worse, probably worse. So one of the things that I saw as a potential connection, right, is that this notion of limitless growth, or growth for its own sake, without having to serve a purpose, while respecting no limit, you argue is something that comes from Nissa, and his notion that his construal of God as an object of limitless desire, but then that desire for God itself becomes its own object, and it goes on and on and on forever, right? And so there's a way in which, I don't know, across history or something like this, you're saying this is the first time you see in history this kind of logic of desire that can sort of never be satisfied and must always grow. And it seemed to me that you were sort of saying that as a defining feature of neoliberalism could be traced back to that.
That's a better answer.
Maybe a better answer, but I don't think it's a good. I mean, I think that those people who are proponents of neoliberal societies and liberal societies in general do have a moral argument that it encourages industry, it works against dependence. Now, these might be things that we think in other terms that, these are excuses. But I mean, there is a moral argument for it. There's a moral argument in Hamilton, that he wants to create, industry. I mean, he's not a neoliberal by any means. He's a statist who wants to create markets and financial instruments. But the idea that, Margaret Thatcher won elections not based on you're going to have all this produced for you, but by attacking the moral demise of the British people, that they become dependent on the dole. These sorts of arguments are sort of the core of its political viability. And to frame it in such a way that it's only some sort of mechanical function of the market, I think underestimates its appeal, and it underestimates the reason that it does have wide acceptance among great numbers of people.
That's a project for the next book. I think that answering this question, what is neoliberalism, that's something I'm working on, and I hope it will be answered in the next.
Or if there are no other questions, please.
Sure, just one quick question. I also haven't had a chance to read the book yet, but I read a little bit. And so I'm just interested in if you could speak to the relationship between this genealogy and Arendt's conception of the rise of the social. And I wondered, is it a mistaken inference to say that somehow in the transformation of the idea of economy from the social situation of the oikos to the social situation of the ecclesia, in the change in the transformation of the concept that occurs in that historical or genealogical transition, there's a shift from I think you said the economy from economy as management of surplus to, and this was very much implicit in your intervention, which is to economy as the production of surplus. And I wondered if, in effect, your argument, in a way, takes the rise of the social that Arendt talks about as a modern development, and in effect finds its beginning in this genealogy. So it's not a function of capitalism or mercantilism, or even of Aquinas, who will actually call the king's realm a household. But all of these conceptual moves are, I gather, you're tracing them back to an earlier conceptual transformation.
That's a main argument in the book, that the rise of social should be backdated to the 4th century, from when Arendt speaks about the rise of social in the 18th or 19th century. That's the main argument of the book. So yes, I'm saying it out loud in the book.
So is the pivot, this changed notion of economy from management of surplus to something implicit in this notion of God?
No, because my argument is that economy has to do with excess, prudently manage with success in order to generate a surplus.
In order to
generate surplus. So you have excess is something that you meet, but people met in either the ancient, in the classical order, because they thought it was in nature. Christians saw it in God, yeah? And the moderns or the liberals see it in human needs and desires. So you have excess somehow, and they chose for this or that reason to prudently or rationally manage it, and from that management of the excess came out surplus. So there wasn't a change in that sense. But you have the rise of the social in the 4th century. And funny enough, if you read Arendt herself, when she, in her dissertation about St. Augustine, she speaks about the social, but she put it in inverted commas. Okay? In Augustine, which is the less social of all the church fathers, because for him, we have the Greek, it's what people today call the social trinity. Yeah, so the Trinity is in society, and for Augustine, the Trinity is in the mind, or in the soul and the mind, whatever. But even in Augustine, she finds the social, and every chapter which speaks about Augustine ends up with society, or the social, I can't remember. But when she speaks in 1951, in the 1956, in the human condition, the rise of the social happened in modernity. And I think much of the criticism that came up of Arendt would be resolved or solved, or at least they have to deal with it if they go back to the 4th century into what I'm trying to do.
Yeah.
And the social, and you're saying the social as she uses it in the dissertation is...
it's the same, it's a Christian society.
It doesn't refer to just relationality, it's actually the social as your
interest. And I think that doing that, I think she was, when she speaks in the human condition, when she speaks about the economic human condition, I think that's another dimension. If you insert the Christian society, the Christian economy, so the understanding of the human condition, the economic human condition changes as well. But I think that's quite complicated, so it's in the book. The rise of social happened in the 4th century.
Thank you very much. Thank you all, and thank you for being here.